Exercise 3 of the Tribal Data Toolbox is entering QC data. So I get all excited. I go to my folder, Exercise 3. Oh, I've got both an exercise description and Ozone Analyzer QC sheets. I feel like I just should jump in and start doing this, but first a thought occurs to me, maybe I should back up my toolbox. Did I back it up last time? So I am going to check my backup folder. I'm going to go into my toolbox backups. Yes, after exercise 2, and I'm on exercise 3, so I verified that I backed it up. So I want to take a look at what these QC sheets are. First, I'm going to open up the exercise description and the QC sheets, and the QC sheets represent 2 checks. When somebody went to the site on the 8th of August, the Site 1 ozone analyzer was checked, and this whole first sheet is the sheet that represents what the data that they gathered at the site, and then also filled in later. This first page of the ozone analyzer QC sheets document. The second page is 2 weeks later. On the 22nd, they went back to the site and did this QC check again. The reason we have these as entering first into the toolbox is because, of course, if you start gathering data and you haven't done any QC checks at all, well, you might as well just put that data in a nice little junk folder, because you need to do QC checks when you start monitoring, and then for most continuous gaseous analyzers, at least every 2 weeks, a site visit with QC checks. So when we look at the toolbox, you can see that what we're in now is routine data operations. And if you click on continuous and met, the first button is enter quality control data. That's because what you want is your data spanned, bookended on either side with passing QC checks. So obviously, before you import data into the toolbox, if you've been to the site, you've set it up, you've done your first set of QC checks, let's enter them. So I'm clicking on this top button and it opens up this scary form. Once again, it opens up to a new blank form. I say, holy moly, I had better read the SOP pertaining to this. So I open up my SOP for continuous data, and if you remember, it's got these hyperlinks at the beginning. So enter QC data, I just do control click and it opens it up to that part of the SOP, and it says enter QC data to open the following window, and it shows this scary window, and then it tells you again that the required fields are those in yellow, and that the ones with highlighted red, a red border, are key fields. So those you had really better get right the first time because they're difficult to check. The exercise description says follow the SOP and enter the QC data. Refer to the SOP a lot, keep it open, and then enter the data using common sense. What I mean by common sense is if you look at this QC check sheet, you can see that there are some fields that are blank, like the sample frequency, control frequency. A lot of times people use forms or get forms off the internet, and not all fields have to be filled out. So I have already, in order to save time on this movie, entered the information, and you can tell that because this form opened up to the new blank record 3 out of 3. So if we go back to the beginning, I'll go through what each one of these are. So what I've done here is entered this information from this sheet into this form. This is an ozone analyzer. This is the same form that is used for all the different continuous methods. So not all fields have to be entered. This is a all size fits one, which is why it's so big and scary. Most times you're not going to fill out, for example, all 5 of these check rows. So this is an ozone analyzer, so we've selected ozone. It's a bi-weekly check, which we know because there's 2 weeks elapsed in our 2 QC check sheets. This is yellow, so you have to enter something, but if you get this one wrong, it's okay. It doesn't have a red border on it. The next is the date. That's obviously very important. The time, the site name, and the site serial number. So we're doing a check on the ozone instrument 001. Remember, that was the one that was repaired. Now, what do these green fields mean? Well, looking back at the ozone QC sheet, it has a place on the form, audit standard, yes or no. And we've put in parentheses. No, this is not an audit standard. An audit standard would be one that an auditor brings, and it could be an informal audit done by another tribe or a consortium nearby or a friendly state person doing an audit. They would, if they are doing an audit, they're bringing their own standard. And in terms of ozone, that's fairly considerable effort. If this is just your equipment, you're doing your own routine QC checks, the answer to this box is no, because this is your own standard. If you answered yes, then you would have to answer these other questions, but we will not review those now because the answer is no, and then you can see those are grayed out. So this is me who's done this QC check, and you can see that some of these that are white, I have been lazy and left that information out. What is important, I think, is the QC device serial number, and I got that from the QC sheet because a lot of times people borrow equipment or they have temporary equipment somehow or another. This QC device, you can enter a serial number here that isn't in your sampler list, and we use instrument 007 for our QC checks. We've got an ozone calibrator that's right in the rack with our ozone analyzer, and we do have information in here that's very important on shelter temperature because that's critical to the ozone's proper operation, is that the shelter stay within a temperature range. If the shelter temperature goes outside the range that is currently recommended, a qualifier pops up here. So if you your air conditioning goes out and you have you know, say really hot, 35, that would be really hot, you would have a qualifier that pops up in this qualifier field. These values here are very important. The 0 check unit, you have to say if it's parts per million, parts per billion. For flow rate units, you might have cubic meters per minute, liters per minute. So it's really important because the Toolbox does these calculations for you about how far away you are from the known. The 0 check is important. So I've got these values from the QC check sheets. And you can see when we are passing 0 air, which is air scrubbed totally free of ozone, through our ozone analyzer, our ozone analyzer says 2 parts per billion. I haven't hooked up the data logger yet, so the 2 parts per billion is what I record here, and you can see that a 0 qualifier, now this doesn't do anything to your data, it's just saying, hey, you know, that's off of 0. So notice this because you're going to be gathering hours and hours and hours of data. So these qualifiers will help you find things later that you just might want to go back and check. The other values I've taken off of the QC check sheet. So the type is concentration, and you can see that you could be doing, say if this was for a PM10 instrument, you might be doing flow. If it were some sort of instrument that had two different flows, which we'll talk about later. You might have different types of flows, or you might be doing a temperature check or a pressure check. In this case, we're checking concentration of ozone, the units, the known value. The known is what the calibrator says. The device display is what your analyzer, your instrument 001, says. And then data logger, sometimes data loggers are off a part per billion or so. Generally what's logged is what's come off the data logger. During QC checks, since you're right there on site, it's a good idea to record what your device says as well as what the data logger says. This calculation here is done automatically. Don't get unnerved by that. When you click on it, it gives you all these weird significant figures. But this is calculated based upon the difference between your known concentration and your output. It gives you that value in percent, and if you're farther away than 7%, it's going to pop up a qualifier here. Then we have done other checks, concentration, units of part per billion, and again these values are from the QC check sheet, and these are all passing. We don't have any qualifiers because all these values here are well under 7%, and make sure all these values are here. So now I am going to check the exercise description and make sure that I've done everything in there. It looks like I've done everything for this first check. I'm going to just review everything that I've got in this QC check form and make sure everything's in there. Now the assignment also includes typing in the information here in the yellow fields and emailing it to your instructor so that you get used to figuring out what these mean. So the first one is enter your initials there, but then did this check on this is the check on the 8th. Did it pass the 0 check? Well, first of all, you can see that I typed something in wrong. I typed this in as 9/9/2006 instead of 8/8/2006. But aside from that, let's take a look at it and see if it passed the 0 check and was the shelter temperature within range. So the shelter temperature was within range. 22 is within the range. I think it's between 20 and 30 degrees C, and there's no qualifier that popped up here. And then was the 0 within range? Well, for this one, the 0 input was 0. You're saying that's ozone scrubbed air, so no ozone left in the air that's going through. But the device, our instrument 001, said 28 parts per billion. So definitely that was a level 1 0. So I'm going to type in that the temperature was within range, but it did not pass the 0 check. 28 parts per billion produced a level 1 0 flag there, and you could type in 28 parts per billion, but that's pretty obvious there's something wrong there with that 0. So now we are going to continue on, and we need to look at this form and fill in these other values here, which we'll do in the next video.